This conference will now be recorded.
So only by seeing we cannot tell. We have to measure for everything, like whether it is small or not. Because see, like small for gestation babies or preterm babies, they'll be small. Automatically, their head will also be small. But we cannot tell by seeing that the head is small, so we call it as a microcephaly. No. So for everything, like they'll be having some growth charts for that age, whether it is normal or abnormal. So coming to the definition in particular, head circumference more than 3 standard deviation below the mean for age and sex. So this definition is a bit confusing. Means see, more than 3 standard deviation below the mean. Below the mean. The mean is like at the at the 50th centile or median, like in the midpoint mean. So below the mean means like it is minus 3 standard deviation. So one can write a definition of head circumference less than minus 3 standard deviation, or according to textbook this definition is like head circumference more than 3 standard deviation below the mean. That indirectly tells that it is below the mean, like below the mean it is like more than 3 standard deviation. That directly tells you like it is minus 3 standard deviations. Remaining all the definitions, when you tell like short stature or anything, we comment it as like minus 2 standard deviation. Minus 3 standard deviation is the condition only that this is the only condition where we see minus 3 standard deviation. That corresponds to like first centile. So this definition is very important. You should not confuse, and in anywhere you won't get any other definitions like it is less than minus 3 standard deviation. So microcephaly, the definition part we completed. So without properly measuring, we cannot see grossly by seeing it like it is small head or large head. So one have to restrict yourself to define it as a microcephaly by appropriately measuring the head circumference and by plotting it on growth chart. Then only you can tell whether it is a microcephaly or normal or macrocephaly. So we need to classify microcephaly. You may ask why we need to classify. Because the classification like it is genetic and non-genetic or primary and secondary. Because we need to give some counseling, right? Microcephaly, if the other sibling is also having like small head, we need to go on check the causes. What could be the cause for this microcephaly? So we can anticipate in the future pregnancies what could be the reason for this microcephaly. See, genetic syndromes and all those things, we cannot change the course of the disease, or we cannot change. Just we can give the antenatal counseling, probable outcomes for that cause and for that disease. So it is primarily divided into two types. One is primary or genetic, and another is secondary, that is non-genetic cause. This is the picture. See, by seeing you cannot tell whether it is micro or macro. We have to plot it, but for understanding purpose, I just kept one picture of microcephaly. So coming to the microcephaly, as it is genetic, the problem can be anywhere during the process of brain formation, like defective in cellular migration, or defective neurulation, or defective proencephalization. So anywhere in the pathway where any disruption in the formation of brain occurs, then this can happen, and it is associated usually with syndromes. There are so many syndromes that are associated with microcephaly. The common syndromes you see are like Down syndrome, Edwards syndrome, Cry-du-Chat syndrome, Cornelia-de Lange syndrome. But you come across mostly Down syndrome. Down syndrome, the head will be small. The microcephaly is one of the feature in that particular syndrome. The syndrome associations are also there. So that is the genetic entity because of the defective process, and associations are usually seen with the syndromes. This is regarding the primary microcephaly. Coming to the secondary microcephaly, we already discussed it is a non-genetic thing. So the insult can be during prenatal period or postnatal period. Like prenatal period, throughout the pregnancy, like maternal intake of drugs. So you may ask, what are the drugs that probably causes this type of microcephaly? One is like phenytoin. So maternal intake of phenytoin. We use phenytoin for the seizure disorder, like anticonvulsants that are taken by the mother can also lead to microcephaly. Defect in the cartilage may occur. Some congenital heart disease will occur. All these are part and parcel of that syndrome that is called as fetal hydantoin syndrome. And one more thing, important thing, is like fetal alcohol syndrome. That is maternal intake of alcohol during first trimester of pregnancy leads to microcephaly in the baby. So maternal intake of drugs. Why we need to know all these things? Because we have to ask retrospectively history. If the baby is born with microcephaly, no genetic association you can appreciate, then you have to ask properly the history. What could be the probable insult to the baby that causes this microcephaly? One should know. And other conditions like maternal illnesses like toxemia during pregnancy, that is like eclampsia, so placental insufficiency, that can indirectly lead to microcephaly, but this entity is not at all clear till now. And one more thing is diabetes mellitus. Any chromosomal abnormalities will be there in diabetes mellitus. Phenylketonuria. This is phenylalanine levels will be higher in the mother. This condition can also lead to microcephaly in the baby. And radiation exposure, especially during first trimester of pregnancy, can also cause microcephaly. And other migrational disorders which are non-genetic can also cause this secondary microcephaly. And postnatal issues are like perinatal insults. During birth process, if any damage to the brain or trauma to the brain or hypoxia to the brain can cause birth asphyxia, resulting in neuronal degeneration disruption, leading to neuronal apoptosis and leading to hampered brain growth. Ultimately, future it may land into microcephaly. We already discussed IEMs, inborn errors of metabolism. In phenylketonuria, we see particularly small head and also spasticity in both the lower limbs. And typical order we can appreciate that is called as mousy order because of phenylalanine levels will be higher in that child. All this is the entity. These are the clinical features that are pertaining to the phenylketonuria. We have to know all these things because when we are approaching a child with microcephaly, we have to probably we should elicit some history. What could be the cause for this microcephaly? And one more thing is like CNS insults like encephalitis, meningitis, and herpes simplex. Any infections to the brain, especially during the developing brain, if all these things occur, automatically neuronal degeneration will be there, white matter changes will be there, and also like damage to the brain. So these CNS insults can also hamper the growth of the brain, leading to secondary microcephaly. And then one more infection is like HIV infection. This is a chronic immunosuppressed condition. You people all know. It can also cause in future, not like at the time of birth we cannot appreciate, but retrospectively we can know. Malnutrition. This is the controversial entity, but malnutrition can also cause microcephaly in the babies. The same thing, remaining all like metabolic conditions, hypoglycemias and phenylketonurias. So till now we discussed primary, it is a genetic component or associated with syndromes. Secondary like insults that occurs during prenatal period or perinatal period. These two are different entities. By seeing the child like general physical examination also, we can possibly rule out this could be like primary, this could be secondary. One thing is like genetic syndrome association. Syndrome, some particular syndrome will be having particular features, so we can differentiate at that point of time. Apart from syndromes, like basic, how can we differentiate? Like primary microcephaly, typical facial features you can see like receding forehead will be there. What happens is brain growth will be hampered and the facial growth will be normal. So automatically sloping of a head will be like backwards with small head. That is typical of this primary microcephaly or genetic association because the insult already happened and the brain will not grow furthermore. And occipital flattening one can appreciate in a primary microcephaly rather than secondary, and wrinkling of skin present since birth. These are the differentiating points to differentiate whether it is a primary or secondary microcephaly by gross examination of the baby or gross examination of the head of the baby during your examination. So here we get a clue whether it is primary or whether it is secondary without asking any history. If at all any syndromic associations or features are there, then it is automatically like a primary or genetic entity. In secondary microcephaly, you see generally a small head, may be present at birth or evident later because you cannot see every type of secondary microcephaly should be evident at birth. We cannot predict at the time of birth. See like malnutrition or HIV infection or encephalitis or meningitis, the insult occurs after birth and the microcephaly you see gradually over a period of time, not at the time of birth. So this is the primary difference between primary microcephaly and secondary microcephaly. So these are the pictures like receding forehead, occipital flattening is there, and also facial features are like a bit prominent. That see a disproportionate thing you can appreciate. The head is small, the facial features are growing normally. So this is the typical of primary microcephaly. We see this is not at the time of birth, right? So after some years you can appreciate this, but you can differentiate clearly. This is primary and this is secondary. So So coming to the genetic entity, in that two entities are there, like familial and autosomal dominant are most common. The next one is autosomal recessive. The instance is 1 in 40,000. Same things like what are the features specific for primary microcephaly are like slanted forehead, prominent nose and ears, severe mental retardation. In this condition, the child will be, see, usually a microcephaly child will be like developmentally delay will be, we expect some developmental delay if the brain is not going in a normal pace with the other peers, so we can expect. But to differentiate between autosomal dominant and recessive entities, in autosomal recessive, the mental retardation is severe, but it is non-progressive. And in this condition, we appreciate prominent seizures, and we know brain is small and with small cerebral cortex. So autosomal dominant, it is a rare entity comparatively to autosomal recessive. Non-distinctive faces, we cannot clearly appreciate by seeing only the facial features whether it is dominant or recessive. Here in this condition, we see slanting palpable fissures. What do you mean by slanting palpable fissures? See, that is nothing but mongoloid slant, that is outer cantha is upward comparative to inner cantha. When we measure distance between outer and inner cantha, they're in like same alignment. They will not tilt up or downwards. If the outer cantha is comparatively up rather than the inner cantha, then we call it as upslanting palpebral fissures. Hypertelorism will be there. Prominent ears, short stature, and receding forehead is common in a primary microcephaly as we discussed earlier. In this condition, how do you differentiate whether it is autosomal dominant or autosomal rare? Is this thing. In autosomal dominant, intellectual impairment is mild. In autosomal recessive microcephaly, the severe mental retardation will be there, which is non-progressive. There also, in that autosomal recessive, we already discussed small brain with small cerebral cortex and all these things. Here also, comparatively, it will be better, but there will be abnormal development of brain with small cerebellar and cerebral hemispheres and tachycardia one can appreciate. But one differentiating point is in autosomal dominant conditions, seizures will be rare, mental retardation will be mild. So these are the entities. Till now we discussed what is the definition, what are the types, how do you differentiate clinically between primary and secondary microcephaly. Primary is a genetic entity, and also in that genetic entity, what are the pattern of inheritance, like whether it is autosomal dominant or autosomal recessive, and differentiating features between autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive. Am I clear? Harika, am I clear?
Ma'am.
Shall I continue? Shall I
Yes,
continue?
ma'am.
Yeah. So this is the same thing again to differentiate. The thing is like seizures are prominent in recessive and it is readily controlled in dominant. When the mental retardation is severe in recessive, mild to moderate in dominant. So we already discussed what are the syndromes that are associated with the microcephaly. Like that is like Down syndrome, Edwards syndrome, Cry-Duchart, Cornelia-de syndrome, Rubinstein-Tabby syndrome, Smith-Lemeli-Opitz syndrome. You cannot memorize all the syndromes, but at least you memorize some 3 of these, like Down syndrome, that is common. I expect you all people should know what are the clinical features in Down syndrome, like mongoloid slant, hypotonia will be there, flat occiput will be there, brachycephaly appreciate, microcephaly, clinodactyly, uh, all these conditions, all these things like, and you appreciate some congenital heart diseases like endocardial cushion defects you can see in Down syndrome. The chromosomal anomaly is trisomy 21. So one should write, usually if at all they ask you the question of microcephaly, the name itself is enough. But if you go on, if they ask you like what is an approach, you have to write some points relevant to each and every syndrome. Those are all like another classes for you people, but just you have to memorize these syndromes. Adverse syndrome also, like it is due to trisomy 18. And in this also you expect some congenital heart diseases as well as like clinical features. You see prominent occiput, hypertonia will be there, rocker bottom foot will be there, and also overlapping of fingers one can appreciate. All these features comes for Edwards syndrome. In Cry-Duchart syndrome, it is deletion of 5p chromosome. It results in typical characteristic cry. And also we expect some congenital heart disease in this also. Cornelia de Lange syndrome, where in this eyebrows and eyelashes will be long. Some congenital heart diseases like ventricular septal defects, patent ductus arteriosus also will be there. So these are the common syndromes associated with microcephaly. This comes under primary microcephaly or genetic association. So this is an example. How do we approach? So for your OPD, if an 18-month-old boy is brought to OPD, parents are concerned whether the boy's head is small or not. They also note that he's not walking as his older brother did at his age. So mother itself is giving the complaints that she appreciates the head is small, and also like some developmental delay. She is telling like that he's not in par with the sibling, that what he had done at that age period. So how do we approach this case? So we have to rule out all the possible causes, whether it is genetic, whether it is acquired or secondary microcephaly. And the first thing you have to measure. So mother told the head is small. You cannot rely on mother everything. Yeah, of course, mother's information will be reliable, but we have to plot it on the growth chart. First, we have to measure the head circumference, that is occipito-frontal circumference, and you have to plot it on a growth chart. Here we found out that it to be -3 standard deviation. So we confirmed it is a microcephaly. So we already discussed what could be things like prenatal history. We have to ask? Family history. First, we have to ask family history to rule out whether it is a primary or a secondary. Then we need to ask regarding prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal insults, like any history of exposure, radiation during pregnancy, any history of torch infections, any history of diabetes mellitus, or any history of phenylketonuria to the mother, or any history of rash, fever, lymphadenopathy during pregnancy to rule out torch infections, and all these things. And we already discussed one more entity is birth asphyxia. So one have to ask regarding the delivery, mode of delivery, how did it happen, like any difficulty during labor or meconium stain amniotic fluid, and any low occurs found out during that period. Any history of significant fever in the neonatal period to rule out meningitis, encephalitis, and all those things. See, that's why we initially dealt with the history, what to ask like in classification, because whenever a child comes to you, we have to ask all these features, what we have already discussed in our previous slides. So coming to the examination part, okay, we asked history. First we measured and we asked history. Then we need to examine. First we have to check head circumference of both the parents as well as siblings, whether it is genetic or any congenital association. One should see. See, at any point of time, we need to check like serial record should be there, not a single record. So serial head circumference recording should be taken. Look for any dysmorphic features to fit into any syndromes that are appropriately fitting, like Down syndrome, Edwards syndrome. So examine carefully for any other dysmorphic features. Then one have to observe the child posture and symmetry of the movements. Inspect the skin for neurocutaneous stigmata like neurofibromatosis or cephaloid spots, because any association may be there for that conditions. And one have to note the overall growth of the child, not only the head circumference, whether the child is retarded or normal. One have to see the shape of the head, and one must differentiate from the craniosynostosis. I'll discuss what is craniosynostosis. See, craniosynostosis means the premature fusion of sutures. If sutures are prematurely fused, what will happen? There is no place for the brain to grow. Then automatically the skull will be small. But depending upon the what type of suture close, like coronal sutures, frontal sutures, sagittal sutures, depending upon the suture closure, the head size will be. It's not like typical single size, like it could be like brachycephaly, scapocephaly, trigonocephaly, depending upon which suture is fused. So one have to differentiate whether it is a microcephaly or whether it is a craniosynostosis. In microcephaly, sutures will be normal, they are not prematurely closed. In a craniosynostosis, sutures will be prematurely closed. So one have to differentiate whether it is a microcephaly or a craniosynostosis. To differentiate, shape of the skull will be abnormal in craniosynostosis, because suture closure will not be like equally, all the sutures will not be closed. Depending upon what suture closed, we get such type of skull abnormality. Prominent bony cage we observe in craniosynostosis, that is ridging. In X-ray, there is no suture line. CT scan sutures are fused in craniosynostosis. Suture lines will be reached, already discussed. ICP may be increased because sutures are closed. If any abnormal pressures in the brain or any abnormal growth in the brain, they will easily automatically leads to minor changes in growth parameters of the brain or CSF fluid or blood volume that easily causes intracranial pressure elevations. So one have to check detailed neurological evaluation including fundus, because in touch infections we appreciate chorioretinitis and also in rubella we appreciate cataracts. So one have to rule out eye examination to know the entity, whether it is what is happening, and developmental examination develop evidence of any delay or regression. So neurodevelopmental delay will also cause microcephaly. So one have to examine developmentally whether the child is normal or delay. But we already discussed one will expect some delay in a case of microcephaly because the brain is not growing normally. So coming to the investigation part, what do you want to do? First, screen for infections. Next, X-ray skull to determine suture patency, overriding or fusion and calcification. CT, periventricular calcifications we expect in cytomegalovirus, toxoplasmosis and all touch infections to rule out any calcifications that are present in the brain or not. And we need to do MRI to know structural abnormalities of the brain. Karyotyping is to be done. If at all any dysmorphism like trisomy 21, trisomy 18, anything, one should get a karyotype if any dysmorphism or if any other clinical features fitting into any other syndromes that already we discussed. Phenylketonuria is also another entity. We get a microcephaly. This also we discussed. So phenylalanine levels in the mother one have to check in this investigation part. Urine. Thyroid screening. Thyroid screening test one should do to rule out hypothyroidism. Okay, we need to do treatment. Specific treatable causes should be treated, and one should control seizures properly, hyperactivity and other neuromuscular symptoms, and one should give genetic counseling. And the next entity is microcephaly. See, in this head circumference is more than 2 standard deviation above the mean for age and sex. Their only difference is in microcephaly, it is more than 3 standard deviation below the mean for age and sex. In macrocephaly, it is more than 2 standard deviation above the mean for the age and sex. So, in this head circumference is high and it is above the mean. It is more than 2 standard deviation. There it is more than 3 standard deviation, that is below the mean. This is above the mean. This is one of the differentiating point in the definition part. So one have to write carefully or else you lose it. So coming to the causes of large head. See, if you come across this condition of macrocephaly, they get the only condition that strikes to our head is hydrocephalus, that is large head. But there are so many causes of this large head, but we'll discuss in detail like hydrocephalus, not all the conditions, but one you should know remaining all the causes of large head, like it will be familial, like megalencephaly, or congenital conditions like in achondroplasia, cranioskeletal dysplasias, hydrocephalus, porencephaly, where cysts will be there in entire brain, and degenerative conditions like white matter degeneration like Alexander disease, Tay-Sachs disease, Canavan's disease, and GM1 gangliosidosis. In all these conditions also you get a macrocephaly, and infectious conditions leading like subdural effusions and empyema also we get macrocephaly. And neurocutaneous defects like tuberous sclerosis and neurofibromas. Thickened skull we appreciate in rickets. Hemolytic anemias where bone marrow expansion will be there, and fibrous dysplasias of bone. In this condition also we get a large skull. So these are the conditions one you should know, but you cannot this is not the class to tell entire each and every detail of every cause. We'll discuss hydrocephalus in the later slides. So this is the normal head growth velocity. At birth it is 35 centimeters, 0 to 3 months 2 centimeters per month, 3 to 6 months 1 centimeter per month, and 6 to 12 months 0.5 centimeters per month, 1 to 3 years 0.25 centimeters per month, and 3 to 6 years 1 centimeters per year. This is a normal thing. So any deviation from this we get an abnormal. So we have to know what the normal is. So we come to the topic of hydrocephalus. Hydro is water, cephalus means brain. Where we get a water in the brain, that is nothing but CSF. So it is like why this entity occurs means either due to increase in CSF production or decrease in CSF absorption. The most common thing is increase in CSF production. So basically this is an imbalance that occurs between CSF production and flow leading to ventricular enlargement. So it is nothing but a pathological, this is not a physiological thing. So pathological increase in ventricular volume due to abnormal CSF accumulation. This is called as hydrocephalus. So a bit regarding physiology of CSF. CSF is secreted at a rate of 500 ml per day at rate of 20 ml per hour. The total CSF volume in infant is 50 ml. In adult, it is 150 ml. See, we all know it is produced from choroid plexus of lateral, third and fourth ventricle. Mostly contribution is from the lateral ventricles. 20% CSF from cerebrum and spinal cord. So you all know what is the drainage of CSF. Like CSF flows from lateral ventricles through interventricular foramen of Monro to third ventricle. From third ventricle to fourth ventricle through aqueduct of Sylvius, and from fourth ventricle to paid foramen of Lashkan, foramen of Mechendi through paid lateral and medial foramen, and 80% enters into cysternal system and 20% enters into subarachnoid space of spinal cord. Then it flows into venous sinuses due to increased hydrostatic pressure through arachnoid villi and granulations. I expect that you all know this pathway of CSF. Why we need to know this? The problem can be anywhere, like interventricular foramen of Monro or aqueduct of Sylvius, or like foramen of Lashka or foramen of Mechendi, because any obstruction in this leads to obstructive hydrocephalus. So this is a picture showing normal ventricles and hydrocephalus, where the enlargement of ventricles one can appreciate. So pathophysiology. So we already discussed there is an imbalance between either production or absorption. So it could be due to obstruction to flow. So we already discussed the flow can be obstructed at any point of time, or decreased absorption, or rare entities like increased production by choroid plexus papilloma, where CSF is produced excessively. Coming to the types, first one is obstructive or non-communicating hydrocephalus. Obstructive thing we already discussed, obstruction can be anywhere. The most common point is like aqueductal stenosis. The aqueduct where from third ventricle to fourth ventricle is connected through aqueduct of Sylvius. So this is the most common thing where aqueduct of Sylvius stenosis can be there. Seen 70% of cases. 70% will be of congenital. Usually it is associated with neurofibromatosis. 2% are inherited, mostly secondary to like intraventricular hemorrhage or meningitis. If any infection occurs, later it heals meiosis, so automatically obstruction to that flow will be there. So we see an entity called as obstructive hydrocephalus. And other types where we get obstructive or non-communicating hydrocephalus are Arnold-Chiari malformation, especially type 2. Type 1 we cannot identify in early ages. It is somewhat milder variant. Another thing is Dandy-Walker syndrome. And the next entity is non-obstructive or communicating hydrocephalus. Here we already discussed the obstruction is distal to the fourth ventricular outlet. So the problem will be there in the basal cisterns or at the point of arachnoid villi. Here we appreciate good patent ventricular system. There is no obstruction during at the point of ventricles like aqueduct of Sylvius or lateral foramen of Monro or any from fourth ventricle to cisterns. We see a patent ventricular system. So the problem is to distal to the obstruction, distal to the fourth ventricular outlet. So the most common causes of non-obstructive or communicating hydrocephalus are, the main important thing is subarachnoid hemorrhage. Other causes are like post-infectious conditions like TB meningitis, any other intra infections like toxoplasmosis, cytomegalovirus, and all these things. And The rare entity that we already discussed is like papilloma of choroid plexus, where there will be an excessive CSF production. So absorption will be less comparatively to production. So in that condition also we appreciate hydrocephalus. There is no problem. Here the important thing is patency of ventricular system. Coming to the clinical features, it depends upon the age group. It is different in infants, it is different in child, because in infant the sutures will be open, so we cannot appreciate all the things, and also like headache and all those features cannot be appreciated in infant. The common symptoms are like vomiting, irritability, lethargy, shrill cry. The child will be drowsy, and in infants we appreciate failure to thrive and poor appetite, delayed motor milestones, mainly of motor. And one more thing that we appreciate is progressive enlargement of head, and there will be slow mental deterioration. This is a picture of skull. We can appreciate dilated scalp veins and enlarged head. So signs, we see like progressive increase in occipitofrontal circumference of more than 1 centimeter in a week. Head shape is normal. Forehead is broad. Frontal bossy. We see like sutures are wide open. Anterior frontal will be wide open and bulgy, and it is non-pulsatile. Open squamoparatal suture can be seen. This is the transillumination test. See, when translucency extends beyond 2 centimeters in frontal area and over 1 centimeter in occipital area, it is abnormal, and it could be suggestive of like hydrocephalus or any hydrancephaly. In hydrancephaly, entire skull is like lightened up, that is seen in hydrancephaly, but in some part of skull is lightened, we see in a condition called hydrocephalus. This is a picture of hydrocephalus. And one more sign is McEwen's sign. This is also called as crackpot sign. It is elicited by percussion of skull. It is due to amplified sound that can be heard from the step from other end. It is indicative of raised intracranial tension, and it is suggestive of separated suture lines. Physiologically present if anterior frontal is open. Usually this is abnormal in a child, and you have to do this with head lifted up, not during the spine position. We have to lift up the head, and we need to percuss, and we have to listen the amplified sound from the other area, from the opposite area, with the help of a stethoscope. So when we hear this amplified sound, then it is indicative of raised intracranial tension. It is indicative of separated sutures. Other eye signs one can appreciate are like sunset sign, that is like eye deviated downwards due to pressure in third ventricle. This occurs due to impingement on suprapineal recess on mesencephalic tectum, causing impairment of upward gaze. That's why the eyes will be in downward gaze. That is called as sunsetting sign. Squint can be there. That is due to raised intracranial pressure due to sixth cranial nerve palsy. And other ocular signs are like ptosis, optic atrophy one can appreciate. And in any intrauterine infections like cytomegalovirus conditions, we can see chorioretinitis. And papilledema can be appreciated because of raised intracranial pressure. Other signs are like spasticity. There'll be brisk tendon reflexes, like deep tendon reflexes are exaggerated. One can appreciate clonus. Why this Babinski sign or exaggerated deep tendon reflexes? It is due to compression and stretching of myelinated paracentral corticospinal fibers arising from the leg area of the motor cortex. That's why lower limbs are more affected than upper limbs, because these corticospinal fibers supplying to the leg will be more affected in this condition. So deep tendon reflexes are comparatively than upper limbs. And other abnormalities like we expect mental retardation, seizures, and gait abnormalities. So in brief, these are the signs like McEwen's sign. Next one is transillumination test will be positive. Another ocular signs like sunsetting sign. We expect squint due to sixth nerve palsy, nystagmus, ptosis, optic atrophy, and papilledema. And other signs like Babinski sign will be positive, spasticity will be there, and brisk tendon reflexes. These are the signs. We already discussed the clinical features of symptoms like vomiting, headache, drowsiness, failure to thrive, poor appetite, shrill cry, irritability, lethargy, and slow mental retardation. So coming to when you write clinical features, these are the symptoms and these are the important signs. So in examination, one should look for any capillate spots are there or not, because aqueductal stenosis, it is more commonly associated with neurofibromatosis. So in examination part, one should look for all these things, and also any neural tube defects because it is associated with Arnold-Chiari malformation. And one more entity is the common cause is Dandy-Walker malformation. Here we expect prominent occiput. In Arnold-Chiari malformation, we see smaller occiput because of cerebellar tonsillar herniation. So during examination part, you have to look all these things along with your symptomatology and signs, followed by any other clues to differentiate the conditions like from various diseases or various other Dandy-Walker malformations, Arnold-Chiari malformations, or vein of Galen malformation, or neurofibromatosis. So one have to look for all these things. So next to the investigation part, first one should, if at all anterior frontal is open, go for an ultrasound, then to assess ventricular size and also to detect any intraventricular hemorrhage. Then go for a plain skull to see the signs of raised intracranial pressure. We can appreciate separation of sutures, and we see erosion of posterior clinoid process. And also we can appreciate increased convolutional markings. We call it as beaten silver appearance, and flat enlarged sella turcica can be seen in a plain X-ray skull. If at all sutures are open, if at all it is a preterm or a term baby or a neonate, one can go for an ultrasound initially, then go with an X-ray skull. If at all raised ICP is there, we can see increased convolution markings, that is called as beaten silver appearance of skull. Then next investigation that helps is CT helps to identify the cause. We can appreciate any calcifications or anything is there if it is due to toxoplasmosis or cytomegalovirus. The investigation to visualize the posterior fossa pathologies is MRI. So MRI is the investigation of choice in this condition. Go for ophthalmological evaluation, check for fundus, as we already discussed. Optic nerve gliomas can be there in neurofibromatosis. We can better rule out that condition in MRI. And also psychomotor assessment we have to do, because developmental delay we expect in any conditions like microcephaly or macrocephaly or hydrocephalus. By using different developmental scales, we can assess psychomotor thing. So in approaching first hydrocephalus, that it is an entity in macrocephaly, first we knew, so have to differentiate whether it is obstructive or non-obstructive type. So to differentiate, even etiologies are different for obstructive thing and non-obstructive thing, right? So then go for clinical features, symptomatology and signs. Then go for general physical examination to look for to rule out any other syndromes. Then go for investigations. Then final the part is treatment part. So first therapeutic management. The goals of hydrocephaly is first to relieve hydrocephaly, then to treat complications. That is not only thing. First manage problems resulting from effects of disorder on psychomotor developmental, and treatment is usually surgical. Medical management aim is to decrease ICP and CSF formation, but it is less helpful. But if at all, if we want to decrease ICP, the drugs commonly used are like mannitol 20%, estrozolamide, oral glycerol and furosemide, but these are less helpful. The main management is surgical. The two shunts. So one is direct removal of source of obstruction, because if at all obstruction is due to any neoplasm or hematomas or cyst, we have to go for direct removal of that source. But most of the time to extracranial area. Usually that extracranial area is peritoneum or right atrium. If at all the shunt is to peritoneum to ventricles, that is called as ventriculoperitoneal shunt. If the shunt is from ventricle to right atrium, we call it as ventriculoatrial shunt for absorption process. This is an example of shunt in a place. Tubing in the abdominal cavity, one from the ventricle. This is called as ventriculoperitoneal shunt. VP shunt, it is used in neonates and young infants, but it requires number of revisions as the child is growing on. Another shunt is ventriculoatrial shunt. Just you write names of these shunts. You need not write in detail. Just if at all, if you get a question of hydrocephalus, you have to write what are the types, what are the causes, what are the symptoms, and what are the signs. Then go with the treatment. One is medical management, one is surgical management. Medical management is like drugs that decrease CSF absorption. We already discussed like mannitol, furosemide, estrozolamide, and glycerol. And coming to the surgery part, just you write it out or mention the names. Like there are two shunts, like one is ventriculoperitoneal shunt and one is ventriculoatrial shunt. You need not write entire thing of all these shunts. So this ventriculoatrial shunt is reserved for older children who have attained most of the somatic growth, or children with abdominal pathology where we cannot go with the ventriculoperitoneal shunt, and cardiopulmonary disease or with elevated CSF protein. Coming to the complications with these surgical procedures, shunt infection is the most serious complication, where presents with fever, lethargy, irritability, sometimes seizures even. And this shunt is also having greater risk of displacement. The most common organism that causes this shunt infections are Staphylococcus and Streptococcus pneumonia. So other difficulties are like thinking of the shunt will be there, plugging of the shunt will be there, emulsion can be there due to mechanical obstruction, and followed by shunt. We have to, so placing the shunt is not only the thing to treat, we have to even give the proper post-op care to do, like to prevent all the shunt infections. So in addition to routine post-op care, one have to place it on unoperated site to prevent pressure on shunt valve. Do not pump shunt without specific direction from the doctor. Monitor like input-output charting and fluid restriction you have to do, and to prevent the fluid overload. Monitor temperature, because increase in temperature is the first sign of infection. Give events good skin care to prevent any tissue damage, and all these things. Post-op care is very important in shunt management. Last thing is family support, because see, if at all is the ventriculoperitoneal shunt, multiple procedures are required. Even behavioral and psychosocial problems will be there, followed by that. So one have to give a proper family support. One have to explain the procedure, and one have to deal with all the complications that you have to explain to the parents and all these things. So later prepare for the discharge. So family support is utmost important thing when you are discharging the patient, followed by this procedure of all these hydrocephalus and all these things. This is the end. So today we discussed three topics, mainly two topics. One is microcephaly, another one is hydrocephalus. Macrocephaly, just we briefly discussed only the causes, not the entire entity. Hope I am clear. Roll number 92. Any doubts? Any doubts?
No, ma'am.
What? Shall I the class? Shall I end the class? Shall I end the class?
Yes, ma'am.
Or shall I ask questions? Just tell me yes or no. Shall I leave the class? Any doubts?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All of you gave your attendance?
Yes, ma'am.
చెప్పేస్తారా 11th వాళ్ళు ఏం చేశారు అది చెప్పావా
This conference will now be recorded.